So you'd be able to meet there. Okay, well, let me ask you this before we get going. What thoughts, what reactions in your mind with we hit all the myths that are surrounding shame and how it operates in our lives and our reactions to it? Anything resonate? Anything sound familiar? Any other reactions you might have from that class? Yeah.
I'm not sure, like, we totally talked about it, but it was definitely in the book about how, like, shame thrives when you keep secrets.
Yes.
Talk about things.
Yes. And I think this is gonna work. Yeah, it does. We're going to talk probably more about that when we get to talking about the stained glass self stuff. But yeah, Brown really hits that pretty hard. And you know, obviously the reality is where's the darkness? And it's, you know, around in us and what we think about things and all the other things. But yes, we will get to that for sure. Actually, ad nauseum for you. Get really tired. We'll be sure to do that. Any reactions or anything? Yes, Ed?
I was kind of just intimidated because one of the points you made was that you need to trust to be vulnerable, but you need to be vulnerable to develop trust.
Yep.
So it just seems really risky to me because that means someone has to make the first move.
Yes. And oftentimes, as you no doubt found out as well, some of you other folks have been in groups, is that if nobody risks, the group pretty much is a dud. That's not meant by any stretch of the imagination to be considered as a demand, but you will be on the horns of that dilemma when we start groups, which will be at the last week of September is the target date for starting groups, and you will be in that dilemma. Now that doesn't mean right out of the gate you walk in, you know, and just dump everything. We have a long enough time, thankfully, in class and in the groups to be able to develop some measure of rapport. You know, the one thing that I harp on and kind of pound the table about is we love to talk about community as long as it is a risk-free one. And quite honestly, there is no such thing. Because a risk-free community ends up being people who are safely ensconced in their castles and yelling at each other things that are safe for them to reveal. So, you know, you see various pictures in Scripture of community in the early church and things like that. And what you find is that the people in those communities were so hungry for connection with people that were of similar beliefs and faith and so forth, that they were willing to risk it all. And risk it all doesn't mean put their life on the line. A lot of them did. But what's risking it all is the confirmation that people think about you the way you think about you. And I can tell you from experience in doing this for a long time, that's probably the case in like 0.00001% of the time. That's about the odds. You know why? Because we are always quicker to give out grace to people than we are to give to ourselves. Always quicker. So we're great at being grace providers. We are terrible oftentimes in being grace receivers. And just like I put up on the screen last time, is that your vulnerability is and mine, and that theme within the context of what we experience around these two kind of poles, if you will. So yeah, I mean, there is that risk. And the other thing I would comment on, which is in transformational, I intimated, as some of you guys have been in transformational with me before, is transformation is really only possible with trust. Anything less than that, and it becomes, I'll settle for reformation instead of transformation, because it will be within my control. And so the worst part about transformation is the trust piece of what that looks like. We want to know all of the risks to be dealt with, and all the risks reduced, maybe not removed, but reduced. And we end up getting something that looks changed, but it's still the same substance. Transformation ultimately is a substance change, which we can't possibly conceive of. So that being said, any other questions or reactions or thoughts or anything on what we talked about last time? Yeah.
So kind of on a similar note, like I remember sometime last week you said your kind of famous quote, like trust and control can't coexist.
Yeah, right.
And like I've heard it before, but just like hit me pretty hard because I realized like that's so much easier said than done.
Oh, no doubt.
Yeah, so just been kind of like, I don't know, trying like not to let myself apply that to like other people and like just kind of, I don't know.
Yeah. Pushing in on yourself on that point.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that whole idea behind there is, well, two things. And I repeat myself. You guys that are in transformational the hour before, I apologize. But we've got a long history with trust, or lack thereof. And it only takes a few instances of that for us to say that I will do everything I can to not have that happen again. And because of that, then I'm busy controlling other people in my life and other things that go along with it, which is the control piece. Remember, the control is not about overt behavior all the time. Controlling by withholding behavior in order to manipulate somebody to behave a particular way. So it's still controlling. It's controlling. I'm thinking controllingly, and we have to talk about that even within this context when we're talking about it in groups and everything else. That's what you confront really. Is we don't entirely know what people are thinking, and the matter remains. And I don't want to know. I know what I think. As a matter of fact, I just kind of fill things out for you, because essentially, if I say I know what I think, and I'm sure they think the way about me like I do, then where's truth found then? I mean, you're the ground of truth about you, and maybe it's possible that other people can perceive something about you that you don't, because you have a dog in the fight. You have a vested interest in the outcome about how good or bad or pretty or smart or whatever the words were that we put up there about never blank enough. So it's a big challenge. I understand that. One of the reasons that I mean, some of you guys were in grief and loss. We started groups out the first week of class. But this one, I wanted to set some things up in place and help you begin to kind of wrap your head around what this is going to look like and what it will be. Why? To somewhat reduce the risk just by familiarity. I think all of us would agree, just because something's familiar doesn't necessarily make it any less risky. As a matter of fact, having something really familiar could be just as risky as something unfamiliar. So there is that, and there's I think some of the conversation we can have around that. I would really encourage you. I know that I've got a lot of material to cover, but I really would encourage you to not hesitate if a question floating through your head. Stop me. And Zoom folks the same way. I have you up front so that I can track the chat as well. So if you guys have questions, you can do that. And who knows who else is going to be rotating to Zoom. Again, that sounds really weird, but okay. All right, anything else? Any other questions or anything? Or reactions? Okay, let me make sure I've got the chat. Oh, there it is, okay. All right, well, let me pray real quick, and then we'll jump into some more irritating material. Father, thank you for your presence with us. Thank you for opportunities that we have like this to begin to have a fuller understanding of the obstacles that we wrestle with every day in our relationship with you, and also just the incredible offer of grace that you offer us, and how it is meant for our freedom. And oftentimes we confess that we don't take the freedom that's ours, partly because we're trying to do it perfectly, and that's part of our landscape of being human and desiring to do best, and instead of being the best. So grant us grace as we continue to walk through and talk about some issues in relationships that we need to be reminded of, and not lapse into shame when we look at them. In Jesus' name, amen. Okay, so what I want to do is, again, I have said this to you guys because a lot of you guys have heard this material, is, but there's a fair number of you guys that have not, and that is going through some material about safe people. Some of that is because of the group stuff we're going to be doing, but also just how does this fit into the context of shame? And then secondly, spending some time and looking at boundaries. Again, shame's lurking everywhere here, okay? So no matter how I talk about it or what I place in front of you, you will have two choices before you, and that is hold in tension the grace is offered for me to learn a different way, or go to shame and say, I'm such a lousy friend, I can't do anything right, and here we go. The shame train has left. So this is the question I want to pose to you, and that is, how would you describe a safe person? And I would add, as a qualifier, a shame-resistant person. Because when we talk about safe people, they are people that seemingly, not shame-free, all right? Brene Brown talks about this in your book. There is no shame-free person. There is shame-resistant people, and those end up being safe people in our lives. And that's what's key in terms of understanding this material. And so I'm trying to put a little bit different frame in place for you guys that have heard this before, because lurking underneath being a safe person is always this idea of being a shame-resistant person, which also means helping somebody else identify when they're jumping on the shame train. People that are unsafe are shame throwers, and they don't know it. People don't wake up in the morning and say, how can I be the most unsafe person I know? A lot of it is they're unaware it's that way. So let's start with some basics here. People in relationship with that are in these relationships that are in trouble oftentimes describe people this way, okay? And this is just a sampling of these. The person doesn't listen to me. The person's so perfect that the person can't understand my struggles. They're always trying to control me. All of those things are their description of when the relationship gets in trouble. And I'll hear these comments all the time in counseling. Getting into trouble, and not on life support yet, but you see these elements that are part of the conversation in the relationship. Probably this particular is probably being dominated when, when think about example, with some you think, conclude with it, how will they handle it, automatically, versus vulnerability is good for me, and that doesn't get selfish, but it and growth are usually connected. They're usually connected. So why? Well, think about little ones. When they're born, they're completely vulnerable, right? I mean, they don't come out fully formed, ready to play basketball the next day, but and fully competent and everything like that. And we see that vulnerability as a natural thing. At what point in our lives do we cross this threshold where we conclude that kind of vulnerability, and that's incompetence, okay? There's an inability to that. But at what point in our lives do we conclude that being vulnerable is a negative thing? And that's, the reality is, and just to understand this clearly, the word vulnerable, the core Greek word is vulneros. It's hard to say with a mask. I can't pull it up. Could pull it down. What does that mean? Capable of being wounded. So being vulnerable is I actually allow people the opportunity to me. But for what reason? It's a very simple one. It's also a reason why you have a journal in this class. Is I don't own something I don't articulate. I don't say. I mean, writing it down is kind of an intermediary step, but the minute I put it out there in public domain land, it's out of my control, and now I'm feeling vulnerable because people can do anything they want with it. So you see some of these characteristics: condemning and judgmental, always angry at me for something I did or didn't do. I tend to be my worst self with this person. And that's how we describe troubled relationships. And I want to make a comparison point. I can't trust them. See, these are all dimensions of the relationship I have with the person. The degree of trust and how I feel and all those sorts of things. What's fascinating is when you look at how God describes people when he's in trouble, when the relationship is in trouble. And he uses something very different descriptors. He uses descriptors like far away, distant, that one's pretty accurate. Unfaithful, they don't trust me. Proud and perfectionistic, unloving, judgmental. See, the people in the slides before were talking about the relationship and what impact it had on them. And God is describing conditions of the heart. My voice seizes up from talking too much to a mask. I blame the mask. Come on back. Okay, so that's how God describes his problem relationship. The thing to keep in mind is there are things about our interactions with people that we in a sense, let me back up. Let me say it this way. We live in a culture that if you say something to somebody and you're a little unsure about whatever it is you're sharing with somebody, there's usually one thing, the 3 words we tend to say. And the 3 words are, don't judge me. Why? Because I'm already judging myself, one. But there is a difference between discerning character and judging Judging is pronouncing somebody's end already. You know, when Jesus talked about judgment and you're going to be judged as you are judged and all those sorts of things, what he said was the ultimate was portraying somebody as being worthless, okay, valueless. So when we talk about being in relationship with people, and I recognize this is not easy, I know this is not easy, but we have been drilled so often with this idea of don't judge that we suspend our discernment of the character of the people that we're in relations with. And discernment is a very different thing because it empowers choices. And judgment is, in some respects, a condemnation. It is a kind of, as we call it, a judgment call about the worth of the person. So we choose friendships on outward appearances, but when we're in relationship, we experience the internal of the person. And so often, the thing that gets in the way of us discerning character is what we hope for. I've had more college students in particular, you know, get into a relationship with somebody and say, wait a minute, this is not the person that I was, that was kind of doing the courting. When we get past the courting kind of stuff, the dating and everything else, and being kind of together for a long period of time, suddenly I ended up seeing different things. Now there are two elements to that. One is we're in a collusion to have us interact with the appearance of who we are with the other person and them with us versus the reality of who we are with them and us. And so when we get into relationship with them, we then start experiencing the internal part of them. And then we say, oops, where did that come from? Well, it's been hidden, but it's been hidden to somebody who doesn't want to see it. That's what discernment is. Now, again, you go toward this and somebody, you will say, I feel so judgmental. But we have to make this distinction between discernment and judgment. And the other part of this is that whenever things go south, we end up condemning our own sense of attachment. And y'all are enough psych students to know that's a natural part of relationship is attachment. It's not the attachment that's the issue. That's part of all of us in our relationships. The issue is what I do in terms of boundaries and things like that with the people that I'm in relationship with. It's not the attachment. So we don't have much training in discerning character. And in a lot of cases, quite honestly, it's a mixed bag. It really is. I train somebody, and particularly women, in discerning the character of the men that they go out with. And before too long, they really get afraid that the sample is going to shrink. I'm just never going to find anybody because I have such stringent standards. Not really. Because essentially, when you find something or someone, which you will, it's people are unformed. But if you're discerning enough, you know the trajectory of certain characteristics of people. If you know what you're looking for, you can see it. So you can see the potential. But again, we can't be held hostage by hope. Hope can blind me to not seeing things because I just hope that person's going to be better someday. And my response is, hope springs eternal in the minds of idiots and fools. So the thing of being made in God's image is being able to discern at what point there's brokenness and somebody is actually owning it and going into it versus at what point there's brokenness and the person says, I'll do everything I can to hide it. And usually that's a clue, for sure. So what I want to do is paint a picture for you guys. There are three different groups of people I want to highlight in terms of being unsafe. there is, and I say this every time I go through this talk, there is no one person who is always safe all the time. They do not exist. Well, Jesus, but we don't interact with him that way. So understand that these characterizations of people, we may find characteristics, we will find characteristics of ourselves in these categories, if you will. And that's really kind of the nature of some of these categories anyway. So there's that, all right? You can have someone who's fundamentally kind of consistently safe be unsafe at times. That probably is most of us. The thing to keep in mind is safety is not just built on I can keep a confidence. Safety is also a part of how I go about giving feedback or how much freedom I allow somebody. And that I'm getting ahead of myself. So this first group is the abandoners. These guys are always enter the relationship with promises of, we'll be forever friends and BFFs and everything will go great and this is just going to be wonderful. But at some point in time, it seems like they just disappear. They can't finish. They don't continue. The reality is, which you probably heard the phrase, abuse people, abandon people. And they don't really recognize that as a pattern of their own. The worst part about this is getting too close, and with time, people tend to gravitate toward each other more and more closely. It's called intimacy. And with that, they get afraid that they will be exposed for what they are. Now, there's no standard narrative on that, okay? Everybody's got their own narrative when it comes to that. But they are very close, they're very afraid, and they may not even know this, but they're afraid of that closeness because it will be revealing. And somebody will be more transparent. They may be more vulnerable, and then they feel like, well, now I've got to be vulnerable, and I'm not sure I want to do that. And what do? They bolt. They bolt out of the relationship. The worst part about it is that this kind of approach destroys trust in the future because they have abandoned somebody. And now, guess what this person does? And if this isn't a shame narrative that we can't all relate to, is why do people keep walking away from me? It must be me, because that's the constant. And shame has already entered the building at that point, because now I'm saying there's something fundamentally wrong with me. That's why I keep getting abandoned. And that's what abandoners oftentimes leave behind, is that same kind of sentiment about ourselves and who we are. So the abandoners are one. I will tell you that my personal history is such that I got abandoned in a very profound way at 12. My dad died. He didn't plan on abandoning me, but that one event shaped everything about all of my future relationships. I was always hedging my bets about getting close. And even though it would appear that I got close enough to be married and have kids and everything else, there was always this ceiling that I didn't really become aware of until much, much later in my life, that I was just waiting. I was in the relationship waiting for the person to leave me. And it showed up in a lot of fears, even in newly married, and something happening to Linda during, when she was commuting to school, or any number of things like that. And if we're not clear in understanding what that's about, then there's this braking mechanism on how close we can get. We can get really pretty close. We can even get close enough to have it look like we're all there, but we're not entirely. Because as long as I'm looking back, even partially, I'm not really looking forward. I'm not. Even if I want to try to do peripheral vision, and the one phrase I'd say in cognitive psych all the time, split attention is as good as no attention at all. So that's also part of the landscape for abandoners. The second group is the critics. And the critics oftentimes take this parental role with people. They are cut and dried, black and white, speak the truth without love, have no room for the idea of forgiveness or grace or anything like that, because it's weak. And they live in a very graceless world. You know, in a lot of ways, they're busy parsing your words for where you're wrong, rather than understanding your words for where they can connect with you. And it betrays an assumption. The critic believes that as long as truth is central, then everything will be fine. That all the emotional piece is kind of immaterial. It is unnecessary. We don't have to worry about it. But they confuse, weakness with sinfulness and condemn others when they have the same problems. Critics are notorious for never saying two words, and that is "me too." They don't say those words. They're the ones that perpetuate a community of "you should" instead. And that's the critic. And they exist in every community. Can't get away from them. And they are a part of the landscape, sometimes even of our own discourse with people. And it's important just to identify that. Again, be careful and not letting shame get in the door here with some of these descriptions. We all have characteristics of all of these things. So that's the critics. The next category is the irresponsibles. And irresponsibles are really fun people to be around. They're oftentimes the voice of when you're thinking about doing something impulsive that says, go for it. Just do it. So they equally have problems delaying gratification. They really don't consider the consequences of behavior, and oftentimes will get angry if there's consequences to their behavior. And the thing is that in a lot of cases, because of how fun they are, and I'm not saying this in a negative way, but because of how fun they are, a lot of times we're drawn to them. They're very charismatic. They're oftentimes very extroverted. And so, but they're not paying the consequences, particularly for other people. Now, sometimes they will for themselves. A lot of times they won't for themselves either. But they are very much a part of that kind of landscape, if you will, of interacting. So oftentimes we get drawn to irresponsibles because of who they are and what kind of fun they are and things like that. So if you find yourself drawn to them, you'll see a number of different characteristics. And those characteristics, a lot of you guys are still writing, so I'm not going to jump into this too quickly. A lot of these characteristics that we make excuses for them, we pick up for them, we explain their behavior to people. We do a lot of different things. Here's the fuller list of this. We give them chance after chance after chance. This is the idea that we're hoping that they'll get things turned around. And they may, okay? I will tell you, you have to remember over and over again. I will cheer based on consequence and not always. Okay? In AA, they oftentimes would say the alcoholic or the addict is not going to change if they see the light. but they will change if they feel the heat. And that's true in our relationships as well, is that, now don't hear me wrong, I'm not kind of giving you permission to be a controller and, you know, just engineer consequences for people or anything like that. I'm not saying that at all. But understand that when somebody does something that hurts you in some way, whatever it might be, and you say, oh, it's no big deal, and things will be fine, etc., you run the risk of robbing them of feedback, otherwise known as consequences, feedback that they can then choose whether to, you know, to comply with or not, or use or not, okay? And in a lot of our relationships, I can't tell you, we wonder why our relationships always just kind of never go as deep as we hope them to, and some of it is because we're sincerely believe that giving somebody feedback and kind of having the consequences for their behavior toward us is being mean, and really it's discerning. It's discerning. Because I give somebody says something rude or insulting, and I say, that hurt, and they say, tough, and move on. I've just found out whether I want to continue this relationship or not, right? I find out character. On the other hand, I say, ouch, and the person says, oh, I never realized that hurt. Tell me more. I would never want that to happen. And then they make an effort. It doesn't mean it has to be perfect. No promises of things that I won't ever do that again. Good luck. That's not the. So when we get caught into the responsibles, we end up. One couple that I'm working with right now, and they were in counseling with somebody else before me, and the counselor said to them that one of them, the other person, was kind of a metaphor, and so problems were simple. Dandelions in the answers to the opposite. So you're spending all of your time picking the dandelions for this person, so that they don't get stressed. Okay. Well, that pattern is based in control. Is I don't want this person to get stressed out. I'm going to pick all the dandelions so they don't get stressed out, and if they don't get stressed out, then we're all happy. Versus, you know, I'm not advocating for you to be rude. They're your dandelion. Take them yourself. But it's also, I'll be about who's responsibilities, whose, you know. So the irresponsibles, they think so what I want to do in terms of I want to divide it up, and we're going to look at the personal characteristics, the internal characteristics for unsafe, and then we will shift and talk about how does this turn into interpersonally. So you have the internal, and then the external, interpersonal, and then we'll talk about qualities of a safe person. I'm equating a shame-resistant person. A lot of things that contribute to safe is what we do with shame in our own internal world. So the personal traits of an unsafe person is they think they have it all together. Now, if you ask them, they will get it. But if someone, I always seem to have an answer or a solution for them, what am I implying? So they tend to be more religious than spiritual. They're committed to appearing having a relationship with Jesus than having one. At times that relationship with Jesus is pretty messy. It's pretty messy. There's lots of things we don't understand, and there are a lot of things that we just don't do, and we get frustrated and everything else that goes along with it. And the minute for them feedback, they start getting defensive. Now, again, defensiveness doesn't mean they come at you hammers and tongs in anger. It just means that they always have a reason for why they're doing what they're doing. It's defensiveness. They're defending against what? Well, feedback from you. If I'm defending feedback from somebody that I'm in relationship, what am I saying then in that defensiveness? And that is, you don't get to speak into this stuff. I honestly, I don't want to hear it. I mean, just by behavior alone. So, some other features of the internal is they're self-righteous instead of humble. Now, the word righteous, let me just clarify something for you guys. Because we see it and we hear it in Scripture all the time, like righteousness and a righteous person. And there are a couple different meanings to righteousness, but one of them is not perfect. I think probably the most profound definition of the word righteous is to be rightly related. So a righteous man in the eyes of God is rightly related to God, has that kind of relationship to God. So these people are self-righteous. They say, I say that I'm rightly related to you or to God or anyone else, and no one gets to question me about that. And that's what self-righteousness is. The humble person, if I go to the opposite end of the scale, is the one that accepts the fact that they're not always rightly related. See, there's an acceptance in there that you see, which probably betrays kind of what safe people look like. Is they know their flaws better than anybody else does. And they own them. They own them. And that's very much about it. So they apologize and don't change their behavior. They avoid working through their stuff instead of actually, dealing with it in some fashion or another. And a lot of times they'll deflect things. That would be kind of a kissing cousin to defensiveness, as they deflect it. If you didn't do that, then I wouldn't have said that, or whatever that might be. Another few more of these characteristics: they believe they're perfect instead of admitting their faults. Now, let me make one comment about that. Because I'm sure a lot of you guys have been around people who emphasize their faults. As a matter of fact, they don't think they have anything going for them at all, if you were listening carefully. And that's just an error in the opposite direction. In a lot of cases, our self-deprecation and self-loathing is not a solution for pride. It's not a solution. It's an error in the opposite direction. So, admitting my faults, but also recognizing that I have something to offer. I'm not so fundamentally bad. There's shame again. See, no matter where we turn off this path, we're always met with that. Instead of telling the reality, they're stagnant instead of growing. Usually the stories they tell in terms of their spiritual development and things like that. So, I think I have a few more here. Nope, I don't. Those are the internal characteristics. The interpersonal characteristics, because they avoid instead of connecting. Now, create the features of it. Ashley? Yeah.
Part of it, so if someone's not religious at all, do you consider them a Christian?
I'm going to repeat your question to make sure I got it in here. Not religious at all, does that make them an unsafe person? Is that what you're asking? Actually, I've seen a lot more people that aren't religious at all and are safer than a lot of Christians are. Yeah, and I taught them that, but they, you know, there are two groups not inherently safe: family members and Christians. Just because family doesn't mean they're safe. To some degree, this would be in question. Are they safe? And watch what their answer is, and you'll automatically know based on their answer whether they are or not. Because if somebody says, well, yeah, sure, we define our terms, or the person says, as much as I can, oh, now I've got something. Because somebody's not trafficking in reality are. And that's that. So